Zoom experts, but just, you know, for some of the that maybe, you know, aren't still Zoom oriented. You know, if you video mic, that's optional, obviously, unless you want to, you know, say something, and then video is optional. We, of course, will during this presentation, we will be muting you so that there's no background noise. And there's also a chat. If you go down it, for me, I've got a Mac, and so I'm using Zoom US, and there's a whole bunch of menu items or control buttons down at the bottom. One of them's chat, one of them participants. You can click on the chat. And during the presentation, there will be, I'm sure, questions. You can put your questions in there, and then also any one of us could put additional information, including yourselves, in there. I like to save the chat at the very end too. I've got all the chats from just about every Zoom I've ever attended, and so it can be used as a good resource. And it looks like we're recording. I'm not sure where that's going to be available, but so I'm sure it's going to be available somewhere. And for the first thing, before I forget, if any of you would like calendars, there are 2 wall calendars left and 2 desk calendars left. The wall calendars are $14 and the desk calendars are $15. Barbara Hill is the one that will personally deliver it to your house if you so choose. And you can certainly chat her. If you go down into the chat, you can see that you can choose to everyone or any one of the participants. And so you could, you can leave your information to all of us, but you can specifically leave it for Barb too, and what you'd like to order. So let's see, copy. So you can see who we are by going to this link, about us, at the Northwest Cook County group of the Sierra Club Illinois chapter. And then there's a calendar too, and there's not a whole lot going on because of the pandemic. So the dynamics have changed. I mean, I shouldn't say there's not a whole lot going on. It's just that things that are going on have changed slightly. So you can look up every second Thursday of the month, we have this program meeting, and until further notice, it's still going to be on Zoom. We're also on Facebook too. And there's plenty of stuff going on there as well, including information about our program meetings and what's coming up. And also we're on Instagram too. And same thing, just different ways you can see what's going on with our group and of course Sierra Club in general. Couple of things that are one thing that is going on is, oh, you know what, I forgot to put in a link, but if you're interested, please put in the chat. I was in we're very interested about CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and I was in a Zoom conference the other day, and our group is calling the governor's office every Friday, and when I find it, I'll get you the link, and you can actually call the governor's office too and leave a message, and there's a suggested script when you actually go to the website that I will link, and I'll put it in the chat. And then you can leave a message or talk to whomever answers the phone. And so that's it as far as the business portion. Like I said, a program meeting every second Thursday of the month. This program meeting is about sensible salting. Our speakers, Scott.
I'll introduce them, but I'm just also, sorry, Jim.
That's all right, Pat.
Peter just asked to put something in there about community solar, and so I'm just posting a link and a description about community solar, how you can learn more about distributed solar energy. You don't have to have solar panels on your roof. So I just put that link in the chat. It's on January 21st.
Great, Pat.
Okay, and you can look for that other link while we're talking. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not pronouncing your name right. Scott
Kuykendall.
Water resource specialist with McHenry County Planning and Development, and he's going to share us about winter's salting issues. Scott?
Well, let me just give a few bits of background information. So Scott is the water resources specialist for McHenry County. And you might wonder, well, how did we get McHenry County? I live all the way over here in Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, but thanks to Cindy Screwcred from the Sierra Club, she put me in contact with him. He oversees the county's scientific studies on groundwater, helps develop water resources policy, maintains the county's environmental compliance, and provides education and outreach. And he also has been developing sensible salting workshops and a sensible salting manual. And prior to joining the county, Scott has over 20 years of experience as an environmental scientist for firms specializing in environmental engineering and ecology, and is a member of many organizations dedicated to water resources management, natural areas restoration, and sustainability. And he has a bachelor's degree in geography from Southern Illinois University and a graduate certificate in environmental management and sustainability from Illinois Institute of Technology. So he comes well prepared to talk to this topic. So thank you. Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Pat. All right, share screen.
And I just want to say, so do you want to, we're going to take questions at the end. Was that the consensus?
Yes,
you can post your questions in the chat, and one of our Sierra Club executive committee colleagues will be monitoring that.
All right. Well, thanks, Pat, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Like Pat said, my name is Scott Kuykendall, and I'm the water resources specialist for McHenry County. And my background is ecology, and it's with this position, I've inadvertently become a spokesperson for sensible salting, and that's through my public education and outreach, and working on workshops, and then working with regional organizations on sensible salting. So I've accidentally become a spokesperson on this, but it's something I feel very passionate about, and it is quite interesting, and it's an important topic. Let's see. How do I move forward?
There's a little arrow at the bottom of your slide.
I got it. All right, so our program tonight, we're going to be talking about the connection between the use of road salt and our water resources. So we live on a blue planet where about 75% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. Most of that is salt water in ocean, and only about 2.5% is fresh water. And most of that fresh water is locked up in our ice, and when ice melts, it usually goes into the oceans where it mixes with salt water. Most of the remaining 30% of fresh water is inaccessible or unusable. So less than 1% of fresh water is available for us to use. 70% of that's used for irrigation, 22% is used for industry, and 8% is for domestic use. And so those are around the world. So in America, we probably use more for domestic, but that's worldwide statistics. But what all that breaks down to is only about 0.007% of all water on the planet is available to us to use. And we need to share that with a lot of other life on the planet, including a lot of other people. So we have a lot of people competing for that 0.007% of water. It took 200,000 years for the first billion people to arrive, and only 200 years for the next 6 billion people. So when my parents were born, we had 2.4 billion people on the planet, and within their single lifetime, we've gone up over 7 billion, and we're rapidly approaching 9 billion people relying on that relatively small amount of water. And our actions are polluting that 0.007%. Water is necessary for all living things. It's also necessary for all economic development. You're not going to have people investing in homes or businesses if they don't have access to safe, clean, and reliable water resources. And water is scarce in much of the world. The UN estimates that by 2025, 2/3 of the world's population will live under water stress, and almost 2 billion people will live in absolute water scarcity. And what that means is that almost 2 billion people will have no idea from one day to the next if they're going to have access to water. However, we in the Chicago region have access to a lot of water, and it can be safe and sustainable, but only if we protect it. So this is a map showing the distribution of water in Illinois. And so not only are we unique in the world to have the amount of water that we have, we're unique in Illinois. So you can see that up in northeastern Illinois, there is a lot of water. In Illinois, our water comes from groundwater, lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. So you can see the blue areas downstate are mostly reservoirs that have been constructed by damming creeks or rivers. This is a map zooming in on Northeast Illinois, Chicago region. And you can see most of the suburbs and the city are drawing water from Lake Michigan. So that's the darker blue. We also have a lot of areas relying on groundwater. And so that's the brown colors. The light brown color is shallow groundwater. So that's in sand and gravel layers. And then the darker brown is sandstone layers of aquifer that are much deeper. And then Aurora and Elgin are the light blue, and they rely either completely or partly on Fox River water. And one thing I want to point out with the Lake Michigan water is that up until the mid-1980s, most of the suburbs were actually on groundwater. We were in dire straits, over exceeding our capacity to supply groundwater. And so suburbs switched to Lake Michigan water. But that was a relatively recent development. And if anything ever happens to Lake Michigan as a water source, it would be very difficult for the suburbs to switch back to groundwater at this point. So we need to be very careful with how we treat Lake Michigan. This is a cross-sectional view of our subsurface geology and aquifers in northeastern Illinois. Just below the land surface is a layer shown in brown, and that is our geologic deposits, which include a lot of sand and gravel. Then below that is a layer of limestone, and water will be stored in the cracks and fissures near the surface. And then below that, we've got layers of sandstone. So these are thick layers of sandstone that can hold a lot of water and are very important aquifers. These maps show the distribution of our different aquifers in the region or in the state. And you can see once again, up in northern Illinois, we are very fortunate. We've got access to 3 different types of aquifer. So we've got the sand and gravel aquifer, we've got the limestone, and we've got the sandstone, whereas much of the rest of the state does not have access to those. And in the Champaign area in central Illinois is one of the greatest aquifers in the world. It's referred to as the Muhammad Aquifer. And it's got some of the highest quality groundwater and been one of the greatest aquifer resources known, but it's unfortunately getting polluted from natural gas. Natural gas companies pump natural gas deep into bedrock, and then it's seeping out and polluting the aquifers. So how we treat our water is very important. This is an animated slide showing the natural hydrology of undisturbed land. So when it rains or snow melts, water is able to infiltrate down through the ground, recharge the water table, and then over a period of days, months, years, or decades, water is slowly moving through the subsurface and getting cleaned and cooled and providing a base flow of cool, clean water to our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. So throughout the year, this water is just moving slowly and maintaining water levels in our aquatic environment. But when we pave over or compact the soil, water is no longer able to infiltrate. So water, rainfall or snowmelt hits the surface and rapidly moves downstream, picking up any pollutants that it encounters and going into our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands and creating a flood stage with hot, dirty water, followed by drought, flood, drought, flood, drought. So instead of a base flow of cool, clean water, we're getting hydrologic extremes and poor water quality, which does not support good habitat. So our water resources are vulnerable to a variety of threats. We'll cover some of the main ones real quick. So overconsumption, if you're drawing water out faster than it's naturally being replenished with rainfall, the water table drops. And in our groundwater resources in particular, we are greatly overexceeding our capacity. So in Lake and McHenry counties, we're about even right now. We're probably a little over what we can sustainably take out, but you know, we're about even what we, the recharge rate of the water that's there. But you see the other counties are greatly exceeding the capacity for recharge. So Kane County, only about 63% of their water is sustainable. And then you look at Kendall County, only 22% of their water is sustainable. And they rely 100% on this water. They're actually in dire straits right now and are literally running out of water. So the city of Joliet and its surrounding communities are literally running out of water. And they're in the process right now of approving the construction of a multi-billion-dollar pipeline that'll run into Indiana and withdraw water from Lake Michigan. State of Indiana along their shoreline still has capacity that has not been used, and so they're able to sell that to Joliet. But the average price or average cost for a family to use water will go from about $30 a month to over $90 a month. So significant increase in costs. So these are very real issues. Loss of groundwater recharge. So we talked about natural hydrology recharging our aquifers. However, when we pave over it, we don't get that recharge. So ironically, where the water is needed most and where the most people are providing the least amount of recharge. Historically, our agricultural lands would be a great source for groundwater recharge. However, over the past decade or more, we've been putting in more and more drain tiles, and these are designed to capture runoff very quickly and run it downstream. So we're losing natural hydrology both in our urban and in our rural environments now. Drought is an important issue. It's largely talked about out west, but it's still an important issue here. Many of us may remember the drought of 2012. I was working as an ecologist at the time, and I was out in the field every single 100-degree day and was monitoring wetlands, wetland hydrology, and watched wetland hydrology drop by 20 feet or more. And so very serious water issues during the 2012 drought. It's considered as one of the worst environmental disasters in American history. And that was a drought that just lasted part of a year, and it was followed by record rainfall. So if we had multi-year drought, we'd be thinking very differently of drought today. And you can see in the Chicago region, as bad as we had it, the rest of the state had it much worse. With climate change, we are expecting to get increased precipitation in this area, but we're likely going to get it in the winter and in spring. And in the summertime, we'll have drought conditions. So that is when we need the water the most and when we'll be going into drought. So drought will be an issue that we'll have to contend with here locally. And then contamination. Basically, anything we put into the air, onto the land, or into the ground has a capacity to cause contamination, and that includes salt. And we use a lot of salt, and it is contaminating our water. The main culprit is road salt. However, we also experience pollution from water softeners and fertilizers. Now, salt is toxic to fish and wildlife. It kills vegetation, and it's highly corrosive to metal and infrastructure. So the drinking water standard for chlorides is 250 milligrams per liter. Salt is made up of about 40% sodium and 60% chloride. And chloride is highly soluble. As soon as it touches water, it goes into solution. And once it's in solution, there really is no practical way to remove it. Vegetation doesn't take it up. It doesn't get caught up in soils. It remains in solution. So that's what makes it so dangerous. And in the Midwest, our background levels are usually about below 1 milligram per liter. In some areas, it can range between 1 and 10 milligrams per liter. But in our area, it largely is below 1 milligram per liter. And so we don't have much natural salt, and our vegetation is not adapted to salt for the most part. But 1 teaspoon of salt will permanently contaminate 5 gallons of water. Now, more realistic sizes to consider is a single container on our countertop will contaminate 4 years worth of drinking water per person, or make 30 gallons of water unlivable for fish forever. And an even more realistic size is a single salt truck. So 1 salt truck will contaminate over 65,000 years of water per person, or make 500,000 gallons of water unlivable for fish forever. And we use a lot of salt trucks every year. So road salt will kill vegetation. As you drive along, you'll see burns from the salt that splashes onto vegetation. And when our vegetation dies, it opens up opportunities for invasive species. So you'll see very high quality wetlands that start getting runoff with chlorides go to monocultures of cattails. And what's happening more and more nowadays is actually Phragmites. So Phragmites is one of our worst invasive species. I'm sure everybody on this program is familiar with it, but it's a very salt tolerant plant. And that's one of the ways it's gotten its foothold in this area is like in our drainage ditches, it'll get established and then be able to spread. And so it is a salt tolerant plant that overtakes our wetlands and then actually moves into uplands as well. And then low concentrations of chloride can kill the food that fish and wildlife depend on. And then higher concentrations can kill fish and wildlife directly. So in an aquatic environment, the base of the food chain are plants and phytoplankton. And as that dies off with chloride contamination, that kills off the zooplankton, which kills off the next layer of species, which kills off the next layer of species. So even with a small amount of chloride in our aquatic environments, it can wreak havoc on those habitats. When we're talking about exposure to chloride in wildlife, we're talking short term, which is acute exposure, or long term, which is chronic exposure. Now, the EPA has developed an aquatic life criteria table, which identifies the highest concentration of a variety of pollutants that most species can be exposed to before they're likely to experience significant risk. So for acute exposure, the upper limit is 860 milligrams per liter. So that's a temporary exposure. Chronic exposure is down to 230 milligrams per liter, which once again is 1 teaspoon of salt in 5 gallons. So acute exposure happens when seasonal spikes occur. So in springtime, when runoff with heavy amounts of chloride from the roadways rushes off into our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands, you get this large spike, and it can reach well over 1,000 milligrams per liter. And then, particularly in riverways, that number will draw down as it gets flushed out. But in closed water bodies like lakes and wetlands, that chloride builds up over time. And this is especially true with our groundwater. Groundwater moves very slowly. And so as it accumulates more and more in our groundwater, that chloride is then being provided in that base flow to our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands, and creating a chronic exposure to our wildlife. So as the chloride levels increase in our groundwater, they're also increasing in our surface waters. So there's a direct correlation between those forms of water. And then lakes have natural stratification, so they turn over seasonally. And that allows nutrients to rise up from the bottom and then oxygen to go down from the surface down to the bottom layer. However, chlorides are heavier, more dense than water. And so the chloride settle in the deepest part of the lakes, which impedes natural turnover and mixing. And it prevents oxygen from reaching the lower layers. And then those layers become devoid of oxygen and unable to support aquatic life. This is being found heavily in Minnesota. And they're really paying attention to this because fishing is such a big part of their culture and their economy. So these things are really being taken seriously there. Now, chlorides are also damaging to our infrastructure. So road salt will damage asphalt and concrete, significantly shortening the lifespan of roads. The chlorides are corrosive to steel reinforcement in concrete, metallic pipes and structures, and metal in cars. So we use lots of salt. There are over 28,000 linear miles of roadway in the Chicago metropolitan area alone. In McHenry County, I think we've got over 25,000 linear miles of roadway, and that's going to be true in all of our counties. And each of these linear miles has multiple lanes of road. And so we're talking a lot of surface area being treated with salt. But it is not just roads that we salt. Basically, any paved surface that we put down is up there, and that is receiving salt, which is getting washed into our waterways and groundwater. So the use of salt has not always been heavy. Salt use started in large amounts in the 1960s and then grew exponentially from there. I started high school in 1980, and at that time, only the main roads would be clear. All the side roads would have ice packs. And what that allowed us to do is use skitching as our main mode of transportation. For those of you who don't know what skitching is, that's when you run up behind a car at a stop sign, grab onto the rear bumper, and then slide behind the car. And because all the side streets were ice packed, we could literally skitch from one side of the town to the other. We would not be able to do that today, but somehow without all the salt, we managed to survive. So this is an animated slide that was prepared by the Illinois State Water Survey based on a study they did for Kane County. And what this is looking at is the increase of chloride contamination in our aquifers. So the left panel is our sanded gravel aquifers, and the right panel is our shallow bedrock aquifer. They use color coding to show the increase of chlorides over time. So the light blue is low concentrations, 50 milligrams per liter is yellow. Our drinking water standard is 250 milligrams per liter, and that's orange. And then the upper limit they looked at was 500 milligrams per liter. And so this looks at the increase of concentrations from 1965 to 2015. So we start using salt in the 1960s, and almost immediately we start seeing chloride contamination. By the 70s, that chloride contamination is getting widespread. And what we're seeing here is that there's a direct correlation between the chloride contamination and use of salt on our roadways. The highest concentrations are following the population densities where we have the most roads. So once again, there's a direct correlation between road salt and chloride contamination. So by the 90s, we start seeing hot spots occur. So areas at 50 milligrams per liter, 250 milligrams per liter, and 500 milligrams per liter. By the 2000s, those hot spots get quite pronounced, and we're seeing that in both the sand and gravel layers near the surface and the shallow bedrock below that. And then by 2015, those hot spots are very common, and large areas are at or above our drinking water standards. So this is pretty shocking, and this is not restricted to Kane County. This is happening all around the country. Out on the East Coast, where they've been using salt longer, they've actually got problems where the people's water softeners and water heaters are having to be replaced every couple of years because of the amount of corrosion that's taking place. So once again, these are real issues, and they're being looked at more and more seriously. So you'll hear a lot more about this as time goes on. Unfortunately, there is no alternative to salt for snow and ice management at the present time. So our best option is to use salt more wisely. So a lot of us refer to this as sensible salting. It's known by many names. The Conservation Foundation has a great program called Salt Smart, and you can access their website. It's saltsmart.org, and they've got a lot of great information on there. But we define sensible salting as the use of best management practices for snow and ice management that maintains safety for pedestrians, drivers, vehicles, and property, while eliminating the unnecessary use of salt to minimize impacts to water and the environment. Now that's a mouthful, but I highlight 2 points there. So one is maintain safety. This is by no means talking about making roads less safe. It's about eliminating the unnecessary use. So much of the salt that is put down is absolutely unnecessary. All that excess salt provides absolutely no benefit to society, but comes at great environmental and economic cost. So what we want to do is eliminate that excess that provides no benefit in order to maintain safety and protect our water. So at the residential scale, we've got a few options available to us for sensible salting. First, remove the snow. Physically remove as much snow as possible using a shovel, snow blower, or plow. you do not want to be burning off snow with chemicals. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people assume the chemicals are for. And that is not the case. You want to remove as much as you can, and you want to remove it before it gets compacted. So before it gets walked on, before it gets driven on, because that compaction will force the snow against the cold pavement and form ice. If you don't get that ice buildup, you don't need to use more salt. So by getting it out there and removing the snow as quickly as possible, you're preventing, limiting the amount of salt that goes down. And there are a wide variety of road salt and de-icing chemicals. And one thing to be clear on is there is no such thing as an environmentally friendly de-icer. A lot of products out there refer to themselves as being environmentally friendly, and there is no such thing. All de-icing chemicals have environmental impacts. Once again, do not use road salt or other de-icers to burn off snow. Shovel it off and only use the salt on ice. On a residential scale, you can also use sand or kitty litter to provide traction, and I would use this on stairs. But you need to be careful with the use of sand or kitty litter, particularly if you're using it around a business, because as people track that sand and kitty litter into the building and it dries out, on dry pavement, on that hard surface, the sand and kitty litter then becomes a major slip hazard. So you need to be careful with using those products. And you need to use the right de-icer for the pavement temperature. So different de-icing chemicals have different effective temperatures that they work down to. So sodium chloride is rock salt, and that's our most common and least expensive option. And that's effective down to 15 degrees. So if you've got 10 degrees, 0 degrees, that salt is not going to be effective at all. And people end up putting more and more down trying to melt the ice, but it's not working because it's too cold. You need to be using a product that can go to those colder temperatures. Calcium chloride is probably the most effective. It's effective down to -25 degrees. It's fast acting. So what it does is it's able to absorb moisture rapidly and trigger the effectiveness of that de-icing product. However, it's also regarded as the most corrosive option. So departments of transportation try and really limit their use of this product because it does damage their roadways and metal reinforcement. The next option is magnesium chloride. That's effective down to 0 degrees. It is considered by some to be safer for pets and vegetation. So this is often a product you'll see marketed as environmentally friendly, but it is still corrosive. So you do need to be careful with that if you're using it around pets. And then there's also calcium magnesium acetate. And this is a chloride-free product that's has low toxicity and is biodegradable. So this is considered to be the least environmentally damaging de-icer. However, it is very expensive, and it has high biochemical oxygen demand, which when it gets into water can deplete the oxygen in water bodies. So this even has significant environmental impacts as well. And you'll often see these products in mixtures. So when you're shopping for de-icer, look at the effective temperature and then look at the composition of the material. And you can use that to help you make decisions on what you want to put on your properties. And just real quick, these are prices that I got just off of Ace Hardware's website, but it's important to kind of see the comparison in cost. So their sodium chloride product is 20 cents per pound. Their calcium chloride is 52 cents per pound, so over twice the cost. They have a Eco Platinum magnesium chloride, so I think this is probably a mixture, but that's 68 cents per pound. And then 100% calcium magnesium acetate is $5.80 per pound. So significantly more expensive than any of the other options. And for a resident or even maybe a business, that cost differential, you know, if you really believe in what you're doing, may not be such a big deal. But if you're treating 25,000 linear miles of roadway, that price difference is going to make a big difference. And so you get a sense. One of the aware of is a liquid application called Entry. And you can get this at ACE or online, but it is expensive. But it's a non-chloride based de-icer that you put down in a liquid form. And this is a de-icer. So you put this on ice that has formed. And it's used often in commercial settings because it doesn't cause a lot of the same problems that the pellet-based products cause. So the pellet-based products, as people walk in, just like the sand, they track in the pellets, and those become slip hazards. And then the wet product that's left over from melting the snow and ice is slick. So a lot of the magnesium chloride, I think, is especially slick. But so those become slip hazards. The liquid, the Entry liquid ice melt does not have those same issues. So it's much safer to use around entryways. And so you can target your use of these things in specific locations. You only want to apply what is needed. So generally each kernel of salt will melt in approximately 12-inch diameter area. So a broadly dispersed spread of salt is all that's needed. Once again, that excess de-icer provides no benefit, but has environmental and economic costs. So you want a dispersal pattern that looks more like the left side and not like the right side. And you should probably use a handheld or walk behind spreader so that you can control the dispersal rate. I use a handheld dispenser because I like to be able to kind of target where I'm applying the material. So I don't need to spread it all over the place. I can target it to specific ice patches. And then if you are using that, you want to adjust the spreader rate so that it is providing a broadly dispersed pattern. If you're just putting your hand in a bag or dipping a cup in the bag and tossing that, you're not getting an even dispersal pattern. So it really helps to have some type of equipment. So roads and parking lots are a different scale and have a wide variety of tools in the toolbox for sensible salting. And we'll quickly address some of the main ones real quick. So first and foremost is proper salt storage. There is no excuse for having piles of salt sitting out in the open. Every time it rains or snow melts, it's gushing chlorides into our water bodies or infrastructure. In the case of the salt pile in the bottom left, that's a salt pile I came across behind a strip mall in Crystal Lake. And it was piled right on top of a storm sewer. That storm sewer is completely rusted out, as is all the metal inside the sewer. So that is going to have to be replaced much sooner than it was designed for. And the contractor that had that salt pile there is not the one that's going to be picking up the cost. At the very least, you should have the salt pile on a high point so that it's not getting drainage going to it. You want to protect it on three sides. What you'll often see are concrete blocks holding that material in and then covered with a tarp and weighted down so that it is never exposed to water. But if companies or others are going to be using salt year after year, there are so many options available now, they really should have some type of permanent cover. And there is no excuse for bare piles anymore. Equipment needs to be calibrated. It does not come from the factory calibrated. So it needs to be calibrated before you use it, and it needs to be recalibrated at least annually in order for you to put the proper application rate down. And once again, you want the application rate to be broadly dispersed, like on the left-hand side, not like the right-hand side. All these little piles of salt that are down will be there long after winter. And once again, every time it rains, it's just pouring that water into our groundwater, or pouring that salt into the groundwater or surface waters, providing no benefit, but causing economic and environmental damage. Salt needs to be wet in order to be active. When you're putting salt down on a roadway, they actually rely on the friction of tires running over it to trigger that melting process. So it heats up the salt, triggers that melting process, and gets it effective. What we really want to do is put it down wet. So you add water as you're dropping the salt, and it's being put down in an active state. This improves its effectiveness, which means you don't need to put as bounce. So if you've got going down the road 30 miles an hour, dropping dry salt on dry pavement, a large percentage of that salt is bouncing off into the right of way, where once again, it's providing absolutely no benefit, but coming at great economic and environmental cost. And so just like our driveway, we need to use the correct product for the pavement temperature. One of our most powerful tools is anti-icing. And so this is where you're putting down a liquid brine before a snowstorm. What the liquid brine does is it prevents ice from forming. So it prevents that snow from compacting it against the pavement and forming ice. By having that layer of brine down, it's much easier to push the snow off, which means you don't need to have repeat applications of salt. So just by this one thing, you're putting much less salt down, and you're also making the road safer. This is also where, if you've heard about using beet juice for de-icing, this is where it's applied. So beet juice is a carbohydrate, and it's added to the brine to make it more viscous so that it bonds with the street surface. And that way you can put the brine down a day or two beforehand, and it'll stay in place into and during that storm. And so when you're driving around and you see these types of striping on the roadways, you can be pretty sure that you've got snow coming. And many departments of transportation are now using liquid only. So they're moving away from solid product and using a liquid mix. Once again, you're putting liquids down, so it's working right off the bat. It's much more effective, so you ultimately are putting much less salt down, chlorides down. So McHenry County Department of Transportation has been doing a test route for a couple of years. They use a mixture of 85% brine, 10% organic, and then 5% calcium chloride. And they can modify those mixtures depending on the temperatures. But their test route has yielded a 38% reduction in road salt usage for the season. Now, this is also much more economically viable because you can make brine much cheaper than you can buying solid product. I want to say Jefferson County, Wisconsin has been doing this for many years, and they are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year using liquid as opposed to solid product. So this makes sense from a safety standpoint, an environmental standpoint, and an economic standpoint. Another option is living snow fences. So drifting snow is a big problem. It creates very dangerous conditions on roadways, and it forces repeat applications of salt and remobilizing of equipment to plow it out. By putting living snow fences up, you will be limiting the amount of snow that's drifting onto the roadway. A common way to do this is to work with farmers to leave rows of corn up at the end of the season. This typically means about 16 rows of corn, about 100 feet off the roadway. And the way it works, the snow whips across the open fields, hits the corn and bounces over it and drops the snow on the backside before it gets to the roadway. And so this is a very effective way to reduce chloride use. You can also plant perennial vegetation or even change mowing regimes. So we've worked with our McHenry County Conservation District, and they changed their mowing regime so that at the end of the growing season, they leave a strip of unmowed area so that can act as a windbreak. So a variety of options available. And then training. Training is extremely important. McHenry County, Lake County, Kane County, DuPage County, we've all been holding annual workshops on this for over a decade. Our workshops have trained thousands of people from various municipalities and organizations and have really changed the way salting is done on roads with municipalities. A lot more progress can be done, but we've made great headway with our training. So I also work with an organization called the Northwest Water Planning Alliance, and we focus on groundwater protection throughout our region. And we have a sensible salting committee, and our goal is to protect water quality by reducing unnecessary release of chlorides to water from snow and ice management activities. Our committee quickly found that most municipalities are doing some form of sensible salting, and as government agencies, we've got ways to work with them to move them forward. But in the private sector, there is absolutely no oversight at all, and they are actually incentivized to put excess salt down, partly due to liability. Any contractors also are on the amount of salt that they put down. So they have an incentive to put more and more salt down. And so our greatest opportunity to reduce chloride pollution is actually with the private sector. I'm getting a message saying that my connection's weak. Are people able to hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, every now and then you cut in and out, Scott, but it's usually fairly brief, like, 5 seconds or so.
Okay, my apologies. If I see that come up, I'll pause and start over, but we're getting through this, but my apologies. So our committee developed a 4-step plan to address parking lots and sidewalks in the region. The first step is to develop a regional sensible salting manual. Right now, all the different counties and different municipalities, we're kind of working off of our own and different manuals and standards. So by developing a regional manual, we can all be working in the same direction with a unified front. The next step is to establish a professional regional training and certification program. And we're already working on this, particularly with the Conservation Foundation Salt Smart program. So the city of Chicago and Cook County are not meeting their water quality standards for chlorides, and they have requested a variance from the EPA. And as part of that variance, they are going to have to implement training and a variety of other ways to reduce their chloride use. And so they have a vested interest in developing this program with us. And so they will be a partner and a funding source. And then the Salt Smart folks are working on a 319 grant and other funding forms to hire somebody to develop our professional regional training and certification program. We'll then work with municipalities to create policies that require certified contractors. And then we'll work to pass state legislation that provides limited liability protection for property owners that hire those certified operators and who use proper sensible salting practices that have been identified in that regional training and certification program. And so what this means is we'll be able to harness market forces to transform the way salting is done. So if a property owner has an opportunity to hire a contractor that will give them liability protection, they're going to go with that contractor every time. And so they will be driving demand for certification and implementation of sensible salting policy. So it'll be a self-sustaining program to reduce salt use. And so we are working towards that, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that as the program develops. I'm always asked about solar roads and other new technologies. Solar roads are a neat idea. The idea is that roads are bare most of the day. They're only covered when cars are on them. So the potential for a surface to generate energy is huge. But the technology is probably not going to be done in our lifetime. And, it's the same thing with most of these other technologies. Geothermal roads are very interesting and have been done successfully at a smaller scale. So usually in downtown areas. So like, downtown Crystal Lake would be a good area to do geothermal, but it's not going to be done across roadways nationally. And like we talked about before, every product that's out there has their own environmental impacts. So we don't have a great solution. And for the moment, sensible salting is our best option. So what can we do? We can all practice sensible salting practices at our homes and business. We can hire snow removal contractors that are knowledgeable or certified in anti-icing and sensible salting practices at our homes and businesses. If you work at an office building or at a school, we can also work with businesses, schools, building managers, and other responsible parties to train their staff and implement sensible salting practices. So I've been amazed at how many schools are now sending their staff to our sensible salting workshops. So there's a great interest in schools to be implementing this. And so we can all be working with these businesses and other institutions to be implementing these things. And then, a lot of us are engaged with our elected officials or municipal staff. And so we can work with them to expand their anti-icing and sensible salting practices. If they know people are paying attention to this, they're going to be much more likely to implement these things. So we can all be doing a lot to reduce the salt that's being used. So closing thoughts are that the Chicago region is incredibly fortunate to have clean, reliable, and affordable water resources. And it deserves to be respected, protected, and preserved. Clean water is necessary for all life. It's necessary for all economic development. And our use of road salt and de-icers are polluting our water. So we all need to implement sensible salting practices to protect our water so that we can leave safe, sustainable water for future generations. So that's my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Scott. That was really interesting. And we do have a few questions from folks. So let me scroll back through here and I'll get started with them.
And I'll stop my share here. Well,
Whichever, either way.
Okay.
All right, so Peter Gore asks, I have some snow melt products for steps and sidewalks. What should I look out for in these products? And if I have bad products, how do I dispose of them?
Well, I'll be honest, the amount of salt that would be put down in your driveway is a pale comparison to what's being put down elsewhere. So I don't know that you have to dispose of the product, but be careful what you're buying from now on. The calcium chloride's the most corrosive, and I don't like to use it for another reason. I mentioned before that it absorbs moisture. So it absorbs moisture from the air as well. When you have it stored in your garage or wherever, it's actually absorbing moisture. And so when you go to use it, it's clumped, and I can't use it in my dispenser. So I've actually stopped using that, and I only add it in when I have to break up ice in ultra cold conditions. So, I guess if you do have calcium chloride, you can kind of set it aside for those polar vortex days, because that's the only thing that's going to work under those extreme temperatures. Look for products, particularly if you have pets. That's where a lot of people are concerned. The danger to pets is pretty significant because both their pads are going across the salt, and that can damage their pads of their feet. And then they will lick their feet as well. So they're licking that toxic material off. And then as it melts, it'll puddle, and then they will drink out of the puddles as well. So these materials can have inadvertent impacts. I don't know if it's practical for people, but what I've read is that one of the ideas is to either clean your animals' feet off when they come in from the outdoors. Some people will put like a little tub by the door so that they can walk through the tub and then dry off their feet. Look at how your pets are exposed to it, and that may also decide what you want to use. That calcium magnesium acetate, may be a better option for you. But one thing I do want to point out with that calcium magnesium acetate, that's the non-chloride biodegradable product. It is an anti-icer, so you can't put that down on ice after it's formed. What you want to do is put that down before the snowfall, and that helps you move the snow off much more easily. But it is not a de-icing product, so something to be aware of.
Interesting. All right, next question. I think you kind of addressed this one already, but Barbara asked if beet juice was a non-toxic alternative to salt, but it seems like it's always used in conjunction to salt. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's by itself, it's not a de-icer. And it has its own environmental impacts as well. So it is a carbohydrate and it's a nutrient. And so as it melts off and goes into our right-of-ways, that can be washed off into our streams, lake streams, rivers, and wetlands, and cause nutrient pollution. Once again, there is no easy solution to any of this. Everything has its impact. But beet juice compared to more caustic materials is a much better option.
Okay, so Pat Nuccio asks, what if you start applying a product at a certain temp and then the temperature drops? Should you then apply another product for that new temperature?
That's a good question, and I guess that would be a case-by-case basis. You want to be safe, and so if you do have ice by all means, you need to reapply. But once again, if you're applying it in a dispersed pattern, you're at least limiting that exposure. I'm not going to tell anybody to jeopardize their safety. But that being said, I don't completely make my driveway completely black pavement. I've got snowpack on part of my driveway right now, and I'm chipping it away slowly and surely. But I'm more concerned with where people are going to be walking, and like if there's an incline, those are dangerous situations if you've got icy conditions. So I do prioritize certain areas and accept a certain amount of snow cover. Like I said, in the 80s, that's how I got around. So we survived without bare pavement before, and I think we do need to get a little bit more tolerant of snow conditions. The idea that we can drive like it's a 70-degree day in summer during the middle of a snowstorm is ridiculous. And so we really have developed unrealistic expectations, and we do need to be a little bit more serious about that. But that's a difficult sell. Politicians aren't going to take a chance on accidents occurring. But that is a problem, is people's unrealistic expectations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next, Jim Wallace asks, is there anyone trying to develop some sort of eco-friendly de-icer, since we're 20 years since those hot spots have become noticeable? Do you know of any research and development being done?
Oh yeah, no, everybody's looking for that magic substance. There's a lot of research on that. As part of our group, that Northwest Water Planning Alliance Sensible Salting Committee, we've got a lot of professionals and the companies that sell the salt and salt products as part of our team. We need to know who we're going to be working with, and so we have a very inclusive group of people, and all these guys are looking for those types of products. And hopefully we can find something, but at the moment there is nothing, and once it is developed, it's going to take a while to get that out into the marketplace, but a lot of people are working on that.
Okay, then Jim has another question. What sort of legislation is in place to enforce sensible salting?
Well, right now there is actually legislation that encourages salt use. So we do need to address that more realistically. The current legislation that's out there is in the past, contractors took all the liability of slip and falls, and so they wanted to put as much salt down as possible. But you also had property owners that would be irresponsible, but the contractor would be the one that would take the liability. And so the legislation now puts equal weight on either the contractors or the property owners. And so that's made the property owners want to put more and more salt down. And so what we need to do is develop standards that provide that safety without excess application, and set those standards so that they can be legally defensible. And that way we can create legislation that gives that liability protection to property owners who are doing the right thing. But we need to have the program and the standards in place in order to get to that point. That's why we've got it like a step-by-step program.
Okay, great. So Pat Nuccio has another question. What's the difference between de-icer and salt, and when do you use which?
Well, salt is a de-icer, and I'm just making the distinction between rock salt and the other chloride-based products. So, rock salt is just kind of a common name for sodium chloride, but you also have potassium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride. These are all de-icers. And then anti-icing is, using a liquid product or, a product to put down before the storm to prevent ice from forming in the first place. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. All right, 2 comments. Pat Pat Lawler mentions that there's a living fence row of corn on Kishwaukee Valley Road in Woodstock.
Yep, that's our Department of Transportation has worked with that farmer a couple years now, and the difference in the roadway is quite noticeable. It's a success story, but to be honest, we had to pay the farmers a lot of money to do that. So we reimburse the farmers for their crops, and so they leave the 16 rows of corn up or whatever, and so we reimburse them for that, and we're paying quite a premium for it. And then at the end of the year, they can harvest it and sell it again, so they can actually get twice the profit. We still had trouble getting farmers in this area to participate even with those incentives. Out in Iowa, it's kind of interesting. They're much further along with this. They've got hundreds of miles of living snow fence there, and they actually have it set up so that the farmers leave the corn crops out, and then let the Boy Scouts or the 4-H club folks harvest it themselves, sell it. And so you're reinforcing that next generation of farmers by giving them the opportunity to harvest those things. And sometimes they'll fix up their own tractors to do it. So there's really a social benefit there, as well as the environmental and the safety benefits. So we really want to get this implemented on a much broader scale in this area, but it's been a hard sell. But as we get more and more of these in place, it's easier and easier to make the argument that these things work.
Yeah. Okay, Kathy wanted to say thank you for all you do, Scott. So just want to throw that out there.
Thank you.
All right, Sue asks, I live on a circular court. When the snowplow clears the roadway, they do multiple passes back and forth across the court many times. With each forward pass of the truck, it deposits more salt, leaving behind lots of salt. Can snowplow trucks turn off their salt spreader when they plow difficult areas like mine?
Well, a couple things there, and you bring up a really, really good point. And this is something we talk a lot about in our sensible salting workshops. So in a cul-de-sac, you have very low traffic. And so cul-de-sacs should not be held to the same standards as a roadway with 55-mile-an-hour speed limits. So municipalities develop a policy. So they've got a snow and ice policy that they have to adhere to. So if their policy says bare pavement everywhere, that's what they have to do. So municipalities really should be careful when they write them, or they should rewrite their policies so that there are different levels of service on those different roadways. And so they definitely shouldn't be putting that much salt down on a cul-de-sac. It's a waste of money. Just like I was talking about before, there's, providing no benefit, but coming at great economic and environmental costs. And so that's the type of thing we'd want to work with municipalities to modify. And, as far as being able to turn it off, modern trucks should be able to turn it on and off. And oftentimes they are actually programmed only to provide a certain dispersal rate so that they can't, turn the volume up to 11. Because that's often what was done in the past is, that drivers would get in the truck and just max it out. So they're paying a lot more attention to that now, but it sounds like your community doesn't have a very good snow policy, and definitely should modify that in the future.
Interesting. All right. Pat asks, are certified contractors more expensive to hire? It seems like businesses or multifamily buildings would prefer to go for a less expensive contractor, unless the contractor costs less because they use less.
I would imagine that, especially initially, that there would be a cost premium, but with that cost premium, you're getting, well, and this is in the future. So, this certification program is not in place yet. But so I anticipate that, if I were a contractor and I was competing against Billy Bob's Snow Service that doesn't have certification, I would be asking for a premium because I'm paying for myself and others to be educated and trained. but the clients are getting an added benefit because they're getting that liability protection. But as time goes on, the sensible salting practices are going to become more and more commonplace, and that's going to drive the cost down. The other thing is, I mentioned this before with the brine. You can make a lot of brine with very little salt. So contractors can actually save money by making brine or even purchasing brine as opposed to buying road salt. What happens is about every 3 years, there's this spike in cost. Contractors may not even be able to get salt. A couple years ago, when we had the polar vortex and all that snow, the contractors that were a part of our group were actually flying to Egypt to buy salt directly from manufacturers in Egypt because they could not get salt here. So by moving to a brine product, a liquid application, they can equalize their costs and be much more cost effective and profitable going with a liquid product versus a solid product. And so I think you're going to see the industry go that way anyway, but it does need a push. And you do need to have standards and certification out there to move this forward. But I do think you've got a lot of contractors out there who are already on board.
Awesome. All right, Barbara says the Sierra Club, of course, lobbies for environmental legislation, and she'd like to know if you have the bill number for the legislation you mentioned.
Well, the legislation that we're working on is not there yet. This is a 4-step process, and we're still in step 1 and 2. So we've got a while before we'll have legislation drafted, but that is what we're working towards. And I'll make sure that the Sierra Club knows about it when we get there.
All right, Renee wants to know if the beet juice that's used in the liquid applications is just regular beet juice made out of beets.
I believe so. I'm not exactly sure how it's produced or if it's a different type of beet than the beets that I've got in my cupboard downstairs, but it is beets, and it's the sugar from beets. Beets have a lot of sugar in them, so they actually are a very good product for that. In the past, they had a problem with it because it did have red staining on it, so roads would be stained, and particularly problematic is when people would track that into stores or into their homes or other places, they'd be tracking that red staining. If you've ever worked with beets, you know how difficult that can be. So the beet juice that they use now, they've been able to get rid of the color, and so that problem's been taken care of. But they also use a variety of other things. It's not just beet juice, but beet juice is still one of the main carbohydrates that are added.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. All right, Cindy asks, should people contact their public works if they see piles of salt and try to get them to improve their practices?
Great question, Cindy. And yes, absolutely. A squeaky wheel gets the grease. I've driven my facilities guy a little nuts with my constant calls and photos. But we are now using Anti-Icing at our county building. So I guess it's paid off. But take photos and email them to your public works guys. Absolutely, there's no excuse for it. Our contractors know this. I've been training with them for years now. I mean, these guys know what they're supposed to be doing, and there's no excuse for piles. And if they do have piles, they should be out there sweeping it up. So definitely take photos and send it to your public works guys with a nice note. Be nice about it.
And then she also wants to know, what about private businesses? Have you had any success in doing something similar with them for similar issues?
They have been tough. So we've tried, all of us, every county and everybody working on this has tried to reach out to the private sector to do workshops and training and things like that. And, a lot of these guys are, will be in operation 1 year and out the next. So it's very tough to track these guys. Now, the bigger contractors, you know, they're at the trade shows. They know what's going on, and they're wanting to move towards liquids. And you know, they're very well aware of that. But you know, the industry as a whole is problematic, and that's why we're focusing on it. And you know, the fact that Chicago and Cook County is not meeting their standards and are getting that variance, they're going to be pushing pretty hard in the future. And so that's, you know, we're going to be partnering with them on that.
All right, Cindy says thank you and great information. That's the end of our questions. Did anyone have anything else real quick before we wrap up?
Thanks a lot, Scott. That was very educational, and I love the Nigel Tufnell reference. The ice truck's going to 11. That was great.
Yeah.
And I also put in the chat to not forget the community solar, which is at 5:30 p.m. a week from today, and also our next scheduled Zoom program meeting is February 11th, and it's on controlled burns. And so, if there's nothing else. Thanks again, Scott, and spread the word about sensible salting. It's an important issue.
I
I will
will
do so.
I will post this recording to our Facebook so you can share it with your friends who've missed it and would appreciate the information. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.